going to talk a lot about today a really dark time in my life, a time when I felt really, really alienated and alone. And it's really a combination of a lot of different events in my life when I was in the middle of my drug addiction, which turned into drug dependency. And it was a time when no matter where I was, no matter who I was around, I felt like I was being sort of called out, pointed out, and made to feel like I didn't belong for a wide variety of reasons. And I'm going to get into that today. It's a time, it is a time that was so dark in my life. I think it will be really hard to actually express or describe to you because thankfully I am 9 years sober. And so I've been sort of detached from this for a while. But I did, because I felt pulled to make this, I'm going to do my best to talk about that today and how going through this really dark time, how I was actually led into recovery in a really unconventional way that I have yet to hear anyone else talk about. So, one of the really first low moments that comes to me, and there's a lot of lows here. They say most drug addicts or alcoholics have to hit their bottom, but for me, the case was, I think, a lot of low moments adding up to finally figuring out, like, I think I actually do have a problem and I'm ready to deal with it or try to deal with it. But it took a lot of these sort of moments to add up in my head to make that realization. I was really stubborn. And like I wrote over here on this article, I thought that if I was a drug addict, I would be the first to know, and that just wasn't the case. So, one of the first moments where I remember feeling like discarded by my own parents was when I woke up in a jail cell and they served me these papers called an ex parte order. I just remember becoming so, I think immediately I was just really angry, like, how could my parents do this? They're my parents. And the paperwork was pretty much saying if you go within, I think, 100 feet or 50 feet of either of my parents, I would be arrested if they called the police. And that was a hard time for me because I felt like I'm your daughter and this is what you do to me. This is like how you love me. It didn't feel like I was wanted by my own parents, which was a really hard thing to accept. And of course, that was a temporary order. And my parents, being who they are, they they gave me so many second chances and third and fourth and so on. So the next one was after some time after that order was lifted, um, I was called to the kitchen table and I was presented with the option of, look, I think it would be best if you get out of the state and you go to the state of Arizona and try to find some healing over there, go into rehab, try to get your life back on track. And that also felt like, in a way, at the time I was so dead set on not quitting the drugs. It felt like, okay, well, this is a free ticket out of town and I can just go do whatever I want over in Arizona. But then on some level, I again felt like very pushed off and discarded by my own parents. Like, oh, yeah, you want nothing to do with me, so much so to where you're actually wanting me to leave the entire state. And they were very adamant about that, the part about not being in the same state at all. And I think that was just speaking to how much damage I was really doing to them being in close proximity and them drawing some really hard boundaries. Like, we're going to pay to have you leave, but you need to leave. And if you don't leave, you need to definitely leave our house and our area of town. We need distance from you and we need it as soon as possible. So that was another hard one. Of course, I accepted and I left and I went to Arizona. And the next dark moment didn't take long at all. I took a Greyhound bus down there and I took an entire bottle of Xanax along with lots of just straight vodka, drinking all the way down, because in my mind, I'm going to go check into the rehab. And I mean, who wants to go to rehab sober, right? Like, I don't know a single addict in the world that gets sober and then goes to rehab. So, my first night in Arizona was spent in the emergency room, them shoving a tube down my throat to administer black charcoal because I had alcohol poisoning, and I don't remember a single thing about it other than last thing I remember is getting to the rehab and just flipping them trying to calm me. For whatever reason, I was just furious. My anger was out of control. I was irate, and I don't know why. If it was that I was realizing I was sort of trapped here, or that I put myself here and I wasn't ready to be here. So I just remember flipping the patio furniture, throwing the chairs, the other residents sort of standing back, like with wide eyed, like, who the hell is this? And the people that worked there just, you know, basically all ganging up on me to hold me down to get me off of the premises. And so then when I wake up in the emergency room, they're telling me, I'm barely made it. I'm lucky to be here. Uh, and I feel nothing about gratitude in my heart, lucky to have another chance. I feel nothing of that. And what's more disturbing is I know that they're asking me, like, who can we call? Who's your family? Do you know anybody here? And the answers are just no, no, no. And it took a really long time for me to even be able to remember my name. I didn't remember so much. And that was another low point because I'm thinking, here I am in the emergency room and I almost died, yet I feel really detached from the fact that I almost died, sort of more concerned about the fact that I'm embarrassed by the fact that I wasn't even trying to kill myself and they're treating me like as if I was suicidal. And I'm out here all alone. I have nobody to tell about this that's not going to be completely angry with me. I don't have anybody to call on that wants to help in any way. I've sort of dug myself into this situation, and the only real feeling I had was this increasingly agitated and undeniable scratch and burning, aching desire to just get drunk and high as soon as possible, just to get out of this hospital and get right back to it. So that was another time when I was just really low, and all I wanted to do, only thing I had to do to lift me out of these lows was use drugs. And it seemed like once I hit Arizona, I mean, once I got kicked out of that rehab facility, um, I was off and running, building friendships and connections quick to get myself into drug dependency. And drug dependency, it's not like drug addiction. It's so much worse. It's so much darker. It's like all the work with little of the fun. Um, and that's such an understatement, but anybody that's been there knows. So I can't describe drug dependency. I cannot describe it, but I'll tell you some of the low times in my drug dependency. Some of the times that no matter who I was around, whether it was my boyfriend at the time, who we had relapsed together and we were both like hardcore addicts, just the fact that even he felt like me getting clean was the best thing, the fact that my close friends, those who had become my closest friends and confidants, were also drug dealers, both of them coming to the realization that I needed to be clean. Like, there was something about me that was different, that I wasn't just supposed to stay in these houses and get fucked up every day. I was supposed to get out, and they wanted to help me get out. And I didn't want the help. I wanted to keep getting high. So these were low moments because you have to think, like, how many drug dealers are denying drug addicts their ability to get high? Like, that's their thing. Like, that's what they do. And I have a drug dealer telling me, I can, two actually, two that actually detoxed me in their house, because I got to the point where I was like, I guess I'll give it a shot, and two of them detoxed me in their house, and one of them gave me purchase a ticket to get me back to my home state, which wasn't exactly cheap for somebody to do just out of the goodness of their own heart. I think it really spoke to the urgency of this person probably feeling like, I mean, this addict is like a type of addict I've not dealt with before. This addict is bringing a lot of heat to the house. This addict is somebody I need to be as far away from as possible, so much so that I'm willing to just take some of my profits and purchase a ticket to get her out of this whole entire state. It felt a lot like what happened with my parents and getting me out of the state of Missouri. Now I'm being pushed out of the state of Arizona, and I don't want to leave. I like the drugs here. I like hanging out and getting high every day. And so that was another hard time for me. And not just that, but finally agreeing to sober up, going over to the dealer's house, battling through those first 3 days of detox, which are just horrendous with no medical help, just to go to a lower dose and a lower dose and a lower dose. I remember like hearing all sorts of things. It was like my mind was possessed. I was hearing things all the time, even though I was sobering up. I was like flipping off the sky and cursing God for not existing and not responding to anything I had to say. And finally having these like cravings with my body, where my body just felt like it was kind of spasming out, and I was like in an uncontrollable state, just so much emotional pain, so much physical and mental discomfort. It was basically almost unbearable, but that I fought through that. And then I had him call at the time, my favorite aunt, and ask her, look, I've got a train ticket, and it's gonna put me right here on this date and this time. All I need is a ride to the rehab. Can you help with that? Then hearing, no, essentially, you're on your own. This is your thing. This is your problem. We can't risk being stuck with you. And that was a really, really low time for me, because I felt like, yeah, it's easy to say no to an addict that's just out there using and they're not trying to get better. But now I've accepted that I actually want to try to get better. I've accepted that this is a real problem for me, and I'm going to try to get out of it. And here I am on day 3, and I haven't taken any drugs today. I'm ready to get on the train. I'm ready to do this. And to hear from somebody that all throughout your life you believed loved you unconditionally, to hear them say, no, you know, we don't want to have any part of that. That really hurt. That really hurt me on a new level. I thought, all right, so my own family, my own blood, they want nothing to do with me. Even if I'm trying to get sober, they really just want me as far away as possible. Now, I'm not saying they owed me anything, so let's be clear about that. And I don't want a single person to feel any sort of sympathy for me, because let me get into the next part. So you can probably guess the solution. I was I was dead set on, that's it. There's no help left for me. Nobody cares. Back to using. Back to using more than ever. Back to using in the worst ways possible. IV use, the most dangerous, the most dramatic, um, the most problematic, really. So, okay, let's steal the car. Let's go to another state. Well, for anybody that's not familiar, I did get arrested for that, and so did my boyfriend at the time. We're not going to get into that. When I get out of jail, I I start off and running again. I say to myself, I'm going to do good. I'm going to make Eli, that's my boyfriend at the time. I changed his name on purpose. I'm going to make him proud. I'm going to do the right thing out here in his home state, and I'm going to keep it together while he's locked up. So yeah, I think I lasted an entire 3 days, and then I was off using again, and this went on for so long, this drug dependency. It was just like a hole that I could not dig deep enough. No matter how deep I dug, there was another little trap door at the bottom that opened up and went down even further. Now I've gotten another little set of friends that are enabling me. I've got somebody that comes and she's been hired by a drug dealer to inject me a certain amount of drugs, a certain amount every single day, so that I am no problem. I'm just easygoing, I'm entertaining, I'm selling drugs, I'm using drugs, I'm back to the same old stuff. Well, this was a time that was very hard for me to accept because the very people that I was using with every single day were the very people that were starting to sort of single me out and basically make me feel different, make me feel like I wasn't accepted, make me feel like I'm supposed to be somewhere else, not here. I'm not supposed to keep using. The woman that was injecting me started to inject me, and then she would break down crying, saying things like, "You remind me of my daughter." And it was a hard time for me because I'm just like wanting to stay getting high, but all these signs are pointing me towards that I'm like the rash. I'm like the rash that is nobody can get too close to it for fear of contamination. So anytime somebody gets too close to me, they get sort of so much of this dark sickness that just permeates my entire being and they can't handle it, and so they back off or they try to convince me like, "Look, you need to get some sort of help, like you're not going to come out of this," is the message. This was a time when people within the drug and criminal communities were pulling back from me. I was denying work as a criminal with other criminals because I was such a wild card. Other users were jealous of me because I had an ongoing unlimited supply of drugs, and they would come over and try to steal my drugs. Some people were fearful of me for the degree at which I used and the sort of really impulsive, irrational behavior that I exhibited, most of which leaned very quickly into violence, like just not thinking, just doing. That scared a lot of people, even people that I used with. A lot of people in this time were disgusted with me. They were disgusted that I was injecting the drugs. That was very frowned upon. Most people just smoked, snorted, drank, popped pills, but I was injecting, and that disgusted them about me. They thought I was like the lowliest, most disgusting, sick person for doing that. Just a desperate, pathetic um, user. And a lot of people were angry at me or wanted to get even with me because I wasn't out there living like this really good hearted person. I was just out there every day hungry, hungry to feed this ever growing appetite that I had, this addiction. I would do whatever I needed to do to get the drugs, and sometimes that meant I would go pay house visits to people. Sometimes it meant I would break into cars, break into houses, whatever needed to be done. So I wasn't like exactly making a lot of friends in the process. I was in a small town and I stood out like a sore thumb. And it took almost an entire small town to collectively sort of start recruiting me for this thing that I didn't even know was a real thing. Like to actually be able to sober up and to have a better life. I didn't believe it for a single second, and I didn't want any part of it. It just felt like everybody wanted to get rid of me, like the rash. You just want to get rid of me, but if I go check myself into this facility, it's just going to be the same as every other one I was court ordered to. Like, they're not there to help me. They're just there to check off their boxes and collect their money. Like, I didn't want any part of it, and I was just getting really sick of feeling like everybody was brushing me off. Yet at the same time, the hardest thing to accept about this fact was the fact that I deserved it more than anything. I knew I deserved to be brushed off. I knew I deserved to be killed at this point. So I started to like agitate and get at my strongest enemies on the street, people that hated me the most, the people that I'd betrayed their trust. I started to do things to get at them so that my deepest sort of bleakest, demented hope was that they would get angry enough to come and kill me, because I came to understand that I felt like if I was killed, that would be a service to the community at this point. That would be a service to the community as a whole, not to have me around. It would be a service to my family. They wouldn't have to worry anymore, and they wouldn't have to worry about having all this distance between us. That distance would be permanent. And when my biggest enemy was supposed to come out, meet me out in the desert and finish me off, when she backed out, that was another low time for me because I'm like, okay, now nobody even cares enough to kill me. Like, this is pathetic. Like, this is worse than I realized. And that sounds so that sounds so asinine to say, but that's how it felt in the moment. Like, nobody even cares enough to kill me. I started praying for somebody just to put a bullet through my heart. And that was the point in which I decided that I think maybe some time went on and the thoughts got darker and the feelings got lower and the isolation increased as it always did. And I finally decided that I would just go to the nearest train tracks, which were right behind the house that I was staying in, and I would just let the train do the dirty work, right? The work that I wasn't strong enough to do on my own, the work that nobody cared enough to do. Let the train finish me off. And when in the very last second, I thought I was going to be blown into smithereens right out of this miserable existence that I'd been surviving for so long, that I was finally going to be free. And it felt like for the first time in a long time, and that few seconds when that light was staring me down at the front of that train, I just raised my hands up because I felt relief. I felt like I just felt peaceful, like that was the right thing. And being tackled to the ground at the very last minute, it felt like an ambush. It didn't feel like a good Samaritan of any sort of act like that. It just felt like an ambush. Like, what are you doing? This is what I want. This is what's best. And I can only describe that as miraculous or as God working through someone else, because he was working through my boyfriend at the time, who was equally strung out and addicted on drugs. So this wasn't exactly like a saintly sort of person that you would expect to save your life, but at the time, my boyfriend and I, we were always at each other's throat because we were doing the thing that we knew we shouldn't be doing, and we were letting each other do it and sort of encouraging the very worst of each other for so long. We, instead of turning that hatred inside, a lot of times we would turn that hatred on each other and take it out with each other. So this was, of course, a very unlikely scenario. Somebody that, for the most part, hated this person that I've become in my drug dependency, and we fought all the time, yet he risked and saved my life. Something you would think I would be happy about. I was immediately so angry with him. I remember hitting him, and then he just tackled me to the ground and finally got me to calm down and took me back to the house. So waking up from that, trying to kill yourself, like, there was no question that that would have killed me, and I would have succeeded in that. Waking up from that in a small town, already feeling so ostracized as like the unwanted out of towner that just won't go away, that was another really low for me. And this got to the point where all this stuff was adding up to the point where I had no idea what the next step was. I was again being urged to go seek help, being urged to go to rehab, and I truly thought that that wouldn't help me. And I wasn't really ready anymore. I just was like done. I was in too much pain. I couldn't bear the thought of sobriety anymore. So surviving that suicide attempt was another really low time for me. But during this time, I remember coming out of the backyard for the first time, just going in public. And going in public after a suicide attempt in a town where nobody likes you was so nerve wracking. I think that at that time, I would like to think that I didn't care what anybody thought of me, but it felt like all eyes were on me, and I felt so humiliated and so just, like this wreck of a human being that was just doing nothing but destruction and wreaking havoc, making everybody's life a living hell. And like, I don't deserve to be here, yet here I am, you know? And I remember one of Eli's friends who just days later went to prison, but she didn't like me. She never liked me, but she went out of her way to come over to uh, the house that day. And right as we were leaving, she came up to me and she was like, "Look, Jackie, like, you're not the only one. I've been there too. I just want you to know that you're not the only one." And for somebody that actually didn't like you at all to say something like that and to go out of her way, and she was like this really tough chick, and the fact that she was sharing something so personal with me, that meant everything to me in that moment. And then I did go really heavy into the drugs because I felt like, all right, well, I mean, yes, it's great. Like, I'm not the only one, and this verifies that a lot of the stuff that I'm experiencing, like, it's not just me. She even was trying to say that, like, some of the stuff that I was so paranoid about, dealing with this specific person, which at the time we won't get into that, but she was basically verifying for that too. Like, you're not the only one. Like, he messed with me too. Like, messed with her head, tried to twist things up, and not my boyfriend, but somebody else. And I was like, all right, so, like, I'm not. That just meant so much to me in that moment. It made me feel like not a complete lunatic. It just it made me feel like I wasn't completely off the reservation, that I could figure something out, like something would click. But in the meantime, I was just going to do my thing. I was just going to use all the time because that's what I had to combat this pain. That's the drugs. People don't use drugs just for fun. I mean, a lot of people use drugs because there's this pain inside them that's just welling up, and without me suppressing it with the substances, it was unbearable for me on a day to day basis. I couldn't function without using drugs. Well, that is drug dependency. You physically cannot function without the drugs. So, or you'll just be really sick. You'll just be laid up in the house. So now, how did I find my way out of this darkness into recovery? Nobody in the town still can stand me other than my boyfriend and a few of his associates who just put up with me. I still had no family members I could call on other than my brother who or my sister who would give me the time of day, but I felt so undeserving of anybody's time or attention. I was going inward. Things had become so dark for me that I was only going inward more, and when you go inward and you're already in such a dark headspace, all that happens is you just spiral downward further and faster. So it was a point where nobody could sit and talk to me and tell me anything about getting clean that was going to get through to me. Not my boyfriend's mom, not my boyfriend, not all these people in the town who were just magically sort of coming out of the woodwork to hand me Bibles and hand me big books for AA and offer me rides to treatment or to AA. I felt like I was a top draft pick in this thing. Like, instead of being an athlete, I was an addict that was just so sick that all the churches and the rehabs had come to their attention that there was just this really sick person in need of help, and they were all sort of reaching out. Even this, like, he was a famous musician, and I'm not going to say who because of the anonymous factor of AA, but he found me and he would seek me out 2 times to basically pull me away from everybody and just talk to me and like tell me his story and encourage me. But it did nothing. It fell on deaf ears because I had gone inward for so long that I was completely blocked off to receiving any help. All I thought was people were trying to set me up. He was trying to get me. He was telling me about all these things he'd done because he wanted me to confess to a murder or something that he felt he knew about me, and he wanted me to spill my guts to him. That's why he was spilling his guts to me. So I just I was very standoffish and guarded and paranoid at this point, and the only thing that could get through to me was music. This was a time when one of my drug dealers sort of, he like made me feel seen and understood in the fact that he just came over, and this was in California, so At the time, Tech Nine was one of my favorite artists, and he was not somebody that people in this town listened to. I'd never once, like when you get fucked up and all that, people are always playing music in the background. Nobody was playing Tech Nine. Tech Nine was one of my favorite artists at the time, and this guy, let's call him Jojo, he came over and he gave me the only thing he came to do was have a drink with me and give me this CD that he had mixed up, and it had all Tech Nine on it. And that was one of the first times where I started to go into the music, and the music started to be the only thing that felt like soothing to me. And then it evolved, and somebody else gave me an iPod, and they had loaded up the iPod, I believe, with songs that would start to sort of permeate my subconscious, because they were songs that I wouldn't pick, but at the same time, they were artists that I loved. So one of the artists was Eminem, another one Lil Wayne. And so I started to take all of this in. I started to hear in these lyrics. I started to like be like, wait, what did he say? Did he say the only thing he ever gave up using? This is Eminem. Like, is he saying he got sober? And I was getting high all along to listening to this stuff, but certain lyrics were jumping off to me like, when you're listening to music, it's sort of in the background a lot of times, but this was just in my directly going in my ears because I had the headphones in, and I'm like, what? I think he got sober. And you have to remember, these were artists I listened to all throughout my addiction. So when I started to hear things like that, it really threw me off. And I remember this was a time when these lyrics were just piercing straight through my heart. Music was more than music to me at this time. Music was the realest connection I had to anyone in years. And I'm an artist, and I've always been an artist. And so these other artists basically expressing through their art what they're going through, and that they are actually now on a totally different trajectory than I've ever even heard of. It was sparking something in me, something brand new. It was giving me like this new sort of motivation and inner strength to not just survive my surroundings, but to actually start believing that I could overcome them. And so this was a really, really pivotal time for me. But knowing something and believing you can do it and actually doing it are two different things. So it was still a long road until I actually got clean. But these, um, but so many of these songs sparked in me something that I thought was dead. They were sparking something in me that nobody else was. It was like it felt like they knew me. It felt like they were speaking directly to me. It felt deeply personal, and that's the beauty of art and music is everybody expresses it and receives it in different ways once it's put out there. But yeah, so I would cry to some of these songs. I would sing along to some of these songs, and that was the first time that I was being planted these seedlings that were recovery. And I didn't even know at the time that's what was happening. It was sort of happening subconsciously. But this I'll end right there for today. I hope to do another video where I'm going to break down and kind of do a reaction to some of these songs and lyrics that just really uh, resonated and reached me at my absolute darkest times. So I hope to see you soon.